I've had this question asked or posed kind of regularly over the past several months. And that question is, what right do we have to teach or to train anyone about reinvigoration? Make sense? You've heard that before. You've heard us talking about that before in that way. And so that's how I want to at least begin helping you understand why we're doing this and pivoting today and pausing in our fear discussion. So, and I just said it. So we're gonna pause, or we're gonna our fear training, because I've learned that we may be in many ways going through the motions. So here's the funny thing: when you visit or when you attend another worship service on Sunday, in many ways, they may not look like what we're doing. But we've gotten comfortable enough doing what we're doing that in some ways it's become our liturgy. It's become, we're doing it because it's what we do, as opposed to recognizing why we do it and the import of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So those are going to be stressed while we pause and move away from the fear lessons. I think we need to do that before we jump back into fear. And I'll explain why once we get to that point. So, okay, I actually did that. Just good housekeeping. All right, so here's the question that I'm going to pose to you that's going to kind of begin our study before I get to our real subject. And what that is this question: what will permit this fellowship, this specific fellowship, us, to minister to other worship groups in need of support? What will permit this fellowship, us, to minister to other worship groups in need of support? So I'm going to ask you two questions, and I'd like you to weigh in, and then I'm going to help to shape our answers. And this is where some writing and some recording may make sense when we get to that portion. So here's the first question: what's the purpose of us regularly convening for worship? What is the purpose for us regularly convening for worship? So I'm not talking about the universal church. I'm not talking about the church you grew up in. I'm talking about us, this gang of people that right now are meeting for the most part virtually and emanating out of Gene's house. What is the purpose of us regularly convening for worship?
Are you looking for answers now? Or are you giving us a second question as well?
Oh no, I want to give you a second. You want to give you? Thank you, Sarah. Oh no,
Yes,
that's what.
It was a pregnant pause. So I was like, wait, is he looking for an answer now, or is he going to give us the other question?
And thank you for asking the question, because that's why we want to have an exchange today, so that you're a part of what's going on, as opposed to me just manipulating the ebb and flow today. So yes, the question is posed and the responses are, the floor is yours to respond. What is the purpose of us regularly convening for worship?
Well, part of it is to invigorate ourselves, right, for the coming week.
So, cool word. What's that mean? What's that look like?
Say that again, Preston.
Very cool word. What's that mean, and what's it look like? Maybe for you personally, and then what do you think it may look like for our group?
Well, I mean, it's always a good thing to be able to come and kind of trying to reinvigorate ourselves, so that, you know, because a week is long, right? And you go through a lot of crap during the week, right?
Sure.
And so coming together in worship is just a way to kind of unplug for a minute from the craziness of life, right? And get ourselves centered back on where we need to be to start the next week.
Okay.
At least for me.
Okay, appreciate that. Yeah, appreciate that.
Because
somebody else?
Yeah, because of the way we talk and the things we talk about, we learn from each other's failures and each other's successes, and how we're trying to reach out and engage the world. And that also gives me a little more confidence to get out there and try, even though there may be a failure. So I think because we take the time to have those more intimate conversations that maybe we wouldn't always have time for. I think that it's a learning time and an encouragement time also.
Somebody else?
I've probably written your question down incorrectly. I have, what is the purpose for our regularly convening for worship?
That's the question.
It's not verbatim, but essentially it's there.
Okay,
You forgot regularly convening for worship.
let me read it again. What is the purpose for our regularly convening for worship?
I had us regularly convening, but
Right,
yes.
of us. What's the purpose of us? So without over parsing the words, if you're going to lend itself, you're going to suggest an answer, are you trying to better understand what the question means?
I'm trying to understand why we're asking a question that seems to be answered within itself.
He's looking for the specific reason for us,
Right,
right?
but
Yep.
Convening for worship.
But what does
Yes.
that mean? But what does that,
Yes.
what does that mean? Right?
Yes.
So if you're
Yes.
parsing, okay, sorry, it's my English thing. You're parsing the sentence, right? And you're saying, okay, convening for worship. What does that mean? What if
Yes.
somebody were to ask you, what do you guys do?
Yes.
How would you answer that question? What does it look
Yes.
like? Why do you do this? What's the purpose behind it? What do you get out of it?
Yes.
My question is, it seems as though the purpose is already stated in the question. For
So
worship.
what we've done here is I'm using a word that we overuse, but we don't define it correctly.
Agreed.
So it's there. So it is there in the sentence because that is what we say unless we say the opposite, excuse me, or we say the parallel. Typically what we say to people is we're going to church. So this is an elevated perspective, is I'm going to worship. So it is a word, almost like the word Sarah just used, invigorating. It's a neat word, but what does it mean to you? That's the question. So the word worship is there, and it looks like it has a definition, but I have been learning even through our Slack discussions, that worship means different stuff to us individually. So does that make sense?
Stephen. The voice, I can talk to you.
Okay, the thing that I'm seeing, and I've used this before, so I apologize for the repetition, but worship means ascribing the worship to the one we are worshiping, if that means anything. I even mentioned it last week, where the word for worthy is like a package being wrapped up. So,
Okay. So let's move a little, and my apologies for cutting across you because I don't want us to get bogged down in the grammar unless I tell you it's grammar time. So since you're defining it that way, Brother Gene, how does that apply, that worship that you just described, how does that apply specifically to you?
to me,
Yes.
he is worthy. He's done everything that is necessary for our acceptance, my acceptance into the family of God, and thus he is worthy of our praise, our worship. I know they're not the same thing necessarily, but they seem to feed to each other. So I think we need to, it's basically, let me try one more time. When I think about Eliezer, seeing how the Lord moved in his progress and how he was blessed in his endeavor to find a bride for his master's son. It says that he bowed and worshiped. That doesn't mean he sang Rich Mullins, Our God is an Awesome God. It does not mean he even played any music. There's a different sense of worship for him. And I like to think that that's what it means for me, is to constantly ascribe to Yahweh God that which is due to him.
So thank you, Diane. I think you popped up. Good. Thank you. Appreciate you guys. Thank you for popping in, Diane. I'm glad. It looks like you guys are a little bit motivated because this is a discussion we need to dive into. Go ahead, Pastor.
I'm going to defer to Diane if she wants to go first.
I get where Gene's coming from. There's a difference when you worship alone during the week versus when you come together. There's a different energy and vibrance. Excuse me that I don't exhibit that this morning, but I look forward to going to worship together with my church family because there's an energy that you don't get when you're worshiping alone. And it's an honor to come together on Sunday. Some people say, why don't you ever want to miss church service on Sunday? You always act like, and I'm like, why do y'all always plan things on Sunday? So because it's the one day set apart that for sure, if we can't get there and worship God for as long as it takes to worship him, when we feel like we're done, what are we doing? So I guess it's the energy, it's just the corporate worship, I guess, coming together that I like and enjoy, as well as what others have said so far.
Pastor off mainland.
Pastor, what?
Off the mainland.
I'm just going to say what I'm thinking because it's probably the best way to do this. I don't know that what we do on Sunday mornings should be worship. Now, don't take me wrong by that. I just think worship is something we do or should do 24/7. Now, Diane kind of got a little closer to where my head is with the idea that this is when we get to do it together. But I've said often, my high point in the week isn't always Sunday morning. I mean, I have my high point sometimes on a Tuesday morning by myself in my backyard. If you recall, when I used to hang with you guys in person, I referred to the thing at 11 o'clock as the celebration service. And I tend to think that, but that's not the whole reason you're there even at that point. I liken what we do here and what other churches do as being like the staff meeting for the rest of the week. It's kind of the corporate version of Gilgal. Is what we should be doing is gathering together, which is what the writer of Hebrews says, as when you gather together, assemble, and we report on the week, and we get the instructions for the following week, and that's kind of been touched on this morning already. When we say we're gathering for a worship service, what we do is we compartmentalize worship into what we do together, as opposed to being all the time, every day. So in my mind, this is our staff meeting. We get some training, we get some encouragement, we're held accountable, and we're sent back out. And that's what it should be. And worship is the overarching thing. But there's specific things that should be going on. If people show up for our gathering on Sunday morning just so they can quote unquote feel good they came, they missed the point.
Other folks.
So I wrote down.
Can you hear the person on this end?
Not well.
All right,
I-
I've almost forgotten the original question at this point, but I think the worship is where everybody got derailed because we kind of got stuck on that word. But I wrote down, kind of piggyback off of what Sherry had said. You know, the purpose is for individual growth, growth as a group, understanding our mission, you know, like-mindedness, though we're not meant to be all the same, but, you know, really kind of solidifying that. Well, those were my notes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I want to try to transition as well because we asked about worship, and I want to make certain we weren't already answering the question. The reason for our convening, the reason for our gathering is just exactly what's been said. We need to get our battle plan, get our instructions, get a review of what's happened before, how we've succeeded, how we've not, and be able to really launch back out again and hopefully do better. So the word worship derailed me. That's my fault. I apologize for that. The purpose for our gathering is not to mark time, not to just say I went to church, but to be able to actually be effective in the mission that we've been given.
Okay, so can I construe that I can put that together? Because I was going to ask you when you just said to hopefully do better. Is the definition of doing better what you just ended with?
What I just ended with?
Yes. To better be effective in the mission.
That's what I define as better. I mean,
Okay.
to be able to, and you do this so well, to help us focus more on the temporalness here and the mission that is here for, as our mission statement has said, impacting this world for the next.
Okay. Other folks, other thoughts?
I'm kind of like Diane, that I look forward to the gathering of each one of us here, and specifically to me for the scriptures part, because I know certain ones of you here are gifted with that gift of teaching that I don't think I have. Y'all see things that God has given you within these scriptures that I'm kind of like, I read it. I don't understand the Hebrew portion of it like Gene, Pastor Bruce. You guys are able to go and bring me things that I can't get on my own. So, and then the other people in the group, different perspectives. It's really neat to see how God speaks to each of us differently.
Other thoughts? Thank you for that, Jerry.
I think Jerry used a very powerful word, and he did it so naturally because that's what he is. Fellowship. We need to, I think part of our strengthening together is, as Ellen said, a like-mindedness, not cookie cutter, but the idea that we are on the same page, headed the same direction, and on the same task slash mission. And I've said it before, work together, pray together, play together. That's how you get to know people. This is a fellowship time that we can strengthen each other. So now we're moved to a different shift from worship to fellowship. And this is a matter of gathering together and learning how we can pray better for each other.
So I'm going to ask a question that's going to sound a little snide, but I'm asking it on purpose. What you just said, Brother Gene, do you believe what you just said?
Yes.
Okay, was that a confident yes, or was that a kind of yes? I'm sorry I said yes.
Well, I had to review what I just said. Yes, I believe we strengthen each other. It's kind of like the emboldenedness we've talked about before when we have the two of us together or the three of us together or we're able to be a little bit more bold because there's a synergy, a strengthening in numbers. So yes, I believe that that's what our fellowship is supposed to be. It's a strengthening. It's and like Jerry said, there's just such joy and fun in gathering with this group.
I just wanted to clarify, because when we get to the subject of the topic matter, that's where this should flow, so I don't want you to be surprised when we get there.
Well, I'm not really surprised by what you do, quite frankly, because what you do is you get us to basically hang ourselves and get ourselves on a noose that we're going to eventually have to own because we've already said this.
Other thoughts? I had a second question, but I'm not going to move to the second question in part because I think you guys have fleshed out in some regard, even though you didn't specifically answer, what's the purpose of why we do what we're doing. I think we've kind of, at least the periphery is set for that, so I'm not going to ask that question just yet. You'll see us revisit it pretty soon. Any other thoughts about why we convene and what's the purpose of us regularly convening? So I'm going to blame, one of the nice things about having a Steve and a brother Gene and a pastor is sometimes the overarching thought is not one that maybe the Holy Spirit conveys to me individually, but it comes by way of one of these brothers. And unfortunately, I've had the misfortune to have gleaned a whole lot from Pastor Bruce over the years. And one of those ideas is the idea of, we've mentioned it before, and I don't even think it was Bruce who mentioned it, Gilgal. And so I appreciate very strongly when Pastor Bruce says, well, what we're doing is really kind of a staff meeting. Now, it has a worship component to it, but kind of like Pastor Bruce and Diane are saying, folks, when we come in together, we should already be primed for worship because we've been worshiping. We don't need a jump start. We don't need CPR. We don't need an AED when we get together. It's just the culmination. And now we're gathered together to be able, from the overflow in some regard, or maybe even the underflow, because we've had a rough week out there. We're looking to be together because it's the strategy session. So let me read a couple of notes I have and give you some opportunity to push back. So Gilgal, what does this mean to you? What should it mean? And I've got a couple bullets that say it's a place of memorial for us. It's a place also of consecration and change. And I would also put information. It's a place of memorial for us, but it's also a place of consecration, change, and information. Am I fair in suggesting that that's what we do? And I'm going to make a point here before I finish this question. Brother Steve regularly says, either indirectly or by what he aspires to, it would be terrific for us to be able to go and be effective in this world for the empowerment of the church as the Lord intended. And part of the reason that we fail so mightily is because our churches are not true places these days of change and consecration. And they're memorials, but they're more memorials like tradition, as opposed to a regular reinvestment in the nostalgia that continues to drive us, if you understand what I mean by that. So, is it fair for me to say that it's a place of consecration, change, and information?
I think that even feeds into what Jerry said as far as the information part. We're able to share what we've learned, whether it be through intensive study or experience. I think that feeds into that very nicely.
All right, I haven't insulted anybody by suggesting that our gathering, our Gilgal, is a memorial time that has these three kind of components. You guys are okay with that? All right, no pushback. Oh, go ahead. Was that Bruce?
No, you heard an affirmation from Jerry, I think.
Okay. So watch this, and this is what I appreciate. And I love Bruce's experience and Bruce's perspective of thinking. Because here's my next bullet for this. When we get together regularly on our whatever day it is, but right now it's Sundays, this serves as our Harvard Law School. This is our West Point. This is our finishing school. This is our Paris Island. This is our Top Gun Academy. This is our off-Broadway or our new NYU Film School. If you have questions about why that's jam-packed there, go ahead and pose them or help me understand why you think that's something that I would say.
Well, a lot of those institutions are currently woke, so I'd rather not be associated. If that's okay with you.
Okay. Someone from this side is moving into the, okay, they're there.
So I want to piggyback off of that because I think sometimes though, attending those academies or whatever, it's great. You learn a lot, but then where's the application? And I think of right now I'm doing Babel, I'm learning Spanish. And yeah, I've got a lot of head knowledge. It's getting out there and talking to Preston, talking to Miles on the phone, texting in Spanish. That is kind of scary and really some sound really stupid, but that's the piece that I need to do. Other than that, it just becomes head knowledge, and head knowledge is great, but it doesn't impact the world. And that's where we need to be aware that if we are part of these academies for Jesus, that it's not just head knowledge, that is knowledge that we can apply.
Would you like to move out of the frame now?
Yes, because you're the teacher. I'm sorry, is that not where you
Talk about what you just heard of the earlier woke institutions that Steve has alerted us to.
I'm going to say something that may be off in the weeds, and I apologize if it is. You mentioned the Top Gun, and with Ellen pointing out the application, there are people that are in the Top Gun Academy that have to apply what they've learned. And this is an application of a skill. It's a little different, but yes, they've got to apply the skill. And for some, there is a danger involved, particularly with this academy. And so we have to sometimes face a danger in order to properly apply. And that's what the thought is. If that's off in the weeds, I apologize.
Is the comment that you just made, is that not a part of what Jesus says to us if we carry his cross?
No, I agree. I just want to make certain that I had, because of the things you mentioned, let's face it, there is in every one of those groups that you've mentioned a potential for failure. But there's a different kind of failure if you go to Harvard Law School and you are all of a sudden before a court and you fail. That may cost somebody else their life, not necessarily yours. But if you're flying and you're flying in the extreme and crazy ways that these flyers do, there's a different kind of danger that is not only to yourself, but to your team. So yes, we take up the cross. It is an I die daily kind of thing.
Okay, so you're talking great Bible scriptures. These are great Bible philosophies. Die to yourself daily. You also just mentioned the danger involved. Ellen just talked about head knowledge versus application. And I'm almost going to challenge to add something else to that we might get to today, but it will definitely be a part of our next study, right? But these institutions, for the most part, look, when you go to Harvard Law School, you're not a lawyer yet. You're learning how to be a lawyer. You get to mess up when you're at Harvard Law School because you're not a lawyer yet. But you got to practice mock trials. You got to practice moot court. You got to practice citing precedents and understanding what particular applications work in the actual courtroom. You have to study jurisprudence to understand when to approach the judge and when not to, how the courtroom works. You have to understand that stuff. When you go to Top Gun, the idea is you may be an accomplished pilot, but you're going there because there's more for you to learn. When you go to NYU Film School, which is kind of the alma mater of Spike Lee, you go there to be able to learn from the guys who are making movies to come and show you how to make movies that are marketable or efforts of love. But you're not a movie maker yet until you graduate. So you have plenty of time to learn, to apply, but you're not necessarily considered baked just yet. Now, I'm not saying to us that that we're not a finished product, because in many ways we are, except I'm trying to help us to look at what our convention, when we meet together, what's the purpose? So I think somebody had something there that I might have talked over. Somebody had something?
No, I was just doing so that begs a question. If we are here and in our instruction, in our information time, in our inspiration time, when do we quote unquote graduate, and does that occur this side of eternity?
Very great question. And I will say this to make it make sense. Part of our current study that we've interrupted is to say that by now we should be graduates. But the next study is going to explore why we don't see ourselves as graduates.
Okay, so what you're saying is, yes, we can graduate this side of eternity, but Hebrews, by now we should be teachers ourselves?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Now, understand what I mean when I'm talking graduate. I mean that we should be mature believers as we can, and I'm not talking about the world of believers, the world of the universal church. I don't mean that. I mean this group. This group at this point should have a maturity where we're able to go out and to teach others that which we've learned, and to do it with a sense of confidence. And as I mentioned before, we'll talk further in our next study about why we can't do that. But some of that also has to do with the study we've interrupted right now, which is the fear. And you mentioned earlier in your answer, Brother Gene, the danger. And so we've been studying and talking about fear and answering these questions in a very nice Sunday school kind of way. But we're not applying those things to ourselves, because some of that fear is roosting for some of us that's preventing us from going out and practicing better what we should be about.
Preston, I think, while I agree with what you said about the different organizations, Gene kind of touched on the graduation thing. I think you can kind of take that illustration a little too far. I don't think we need to necessarily take the whole picture of that with your illustration. I think you were just trying to get to the training ground aspect of it. In my mind, if you hold to the idea that I talked about with the staff meeting, it's just, if you stay with the same company, there is no graduation. What happens is you continue to move up through the organization. In Top Gun, you can go from being a student to being an instructor, right? I mean, that you're just, it's just a continuum kind of thing.
Correct.
And so, yeah, it's not that we're never done. We're not done. You don't graduate on earth. There's nothing in the Bible about that.
Right.
We got one graduation. That's when you breathe your last. We should be lifelong learners. I'm going to talk about that in the sermon this morning, I think. We're lifelong learners. And so there's always going to be somebody ahead of you. But if we practice 2 Timothy 2:2, there's a continuum that's going on.
Thank you for that, because I don't want us to get stuck, bogged down in the verbiage only. There's some things that are specific in their meaning, and we may better define those. But this graduation, I'm not talking about really, as Bruce just said, that the laurels and the crowns. I'm not really talking about that at this point. I am talking about what Pastor Bruce eloquently suggested is that continuum of learning. Is that you start out as grasshopper, or you start out not knowing how to wax on, wax off anything, and then later on you realize, oh, I actually know something. And from what it is that you know, you can probably teach wax on, wax off to someone else, even if that's the only thing that you teach, because you've mastered it. You know how it works, and you can help somebody with the mechanics, and you can help them go from just knowing it to doing it. And then maybe from even another step, knowing it to doing it to being joyful. Knowing it to doing it. Thank you. Appreciate the face. Knowing it to doing it to being joyful in it. Because folks, and I'll make this comment before I go to these definitions. You know, when you've had teachers who are excellent teachers, but they teach, like for the most part, they're keeping their jobs. They don't necessarily teach with a sense of joy and a sense of I love this. It's a sense of it's what keeps food on the table. It's what keeps my tenure. It's what keeps me in the state of living in life that I most prefer. I've had those professors in school. So here's a writing down part. And if you want to challenge, please challenge. Don't necessarily take what I say at face value, but I'm going to try to break down some things for you. In part, because I've watched some of our discussions on Slack, and I've watched us not understand why we're doing what we're doing. So let me try to help, and then you can jump on board and help shape that which I didn't write very well. So we have 6 components that occur when we gather together. 6 components. And let me tell you how I've broken them down. Apologetics, music/singing, prayers, fellowship, for want of a better word, dining, and teaching and preaching. I put those together. Is that fair to say that those 6 components make up what we do when we gather?
Can you repeat those 6, please? I missed one.
Yeah. Apologetics, music and singing, prayers, fellowship, dining, teaching and preaching.
Thank you.
Are those fair to say those 6 components make up our time of gathering when we convene weekly?
Yes.
Okay. So let me define what they are, and maybe you can see their application for usage. So our apologetics inform and equip and promote courage. They inform, they equip, and they promote courage. Welcome to push back on those and to clarify, or even to suggest that makes sense.
Is that your goal, Steve, with apologetics? I'm just gonna look at you on that.
Mostly, yes. I say the only thing that it's also to make people aware of,
Yes.
So
but that's part of it.
Awareness,
these are-
yeah, inform and teaching, yeah. Okay.
inform, I'm sorry,
Equip.
Equip and promote courage. Our music and our singing, by the way, which we're not excelling at this point. but let me define that anyway. Inspires, prepares our heart and soul to open for the key content and context that unites us. Let me read that again. Our music and singing inspires, prepares our heart and soul to open for the key content and context that unites us, or that unite us.
With
Question.
regard to,
Yeah.
I have a comment. I have for years likened the music time as the plowing and preparation of the ground for the sowing of the teaching and preaching.
That's kind of what it says without the same words.
Agreed.
Like a true pastor.
There you go. That's mighty nice of you to say that.
Well, yeah, I say that, but I say it with tongue firmly in cheek because I've said that same thing. But I think the worship leader in me says that it should be an end in of itself and not a means to an end.
Yeah, and you know, at its best, Pastor, I think you're correct, but until we're all at that level of expectation, I didn't throw that in there yet. I just put in enough to help us understand at least why we should be doing it. But yes, as a means and end of itself, it should be, but a lot of us, we're not quite there yet. So this is a fair aspiration definition. Questions about that, or does it make sense? Our prayers provide honor, petition, and thanksgiving for the privilege to be Jesus's ambassadors.
Repeat.
Our prayers provide honor, petition, and thanksgiving for the privilege to be Jesus' ambassadors. I just wrecked a whole lot of our praying. You guys can push back on that, especially if you don't agree. And by the way, I appreciate it. Think how your heads are working on this. Talk about for our group specifically right now, not necessarily for the universal church, although ultimately I'd like to think that these would work for them too when they remember why they do what they do. Nobody's sticking forks in me yet. Our fellowship. Couldn't find a better word that would be most familiar to everybody, so I use this one. Our fellowship encourages comfort and ease with familiar persons with like-minded principles. Let me read it again. It encourages comfort and ease with familiar persons with like-minded principles. And when I say principles, I'm talking about scriptural, biblical, God-honoring, Jesus-believing principles. Disagree? Right now you guys are all still on the train?
Can you repeat that one more time, please?
Sure. Our fellowship encourages comfort and ease with familiar persons with like-minded principles. Here's one that's been a bugaboo over the past few weeks, but I want to define it because I think it needs to be defined. Our dining ministers to the body. And when we say the body, we mean us folks with bodies. Ministers to the body to minimize/diminish fatigue, hunger, anxiety, and time management. So let me tell you that again. Our dining ministers to the body to minimize/diminish fatigue, hunger, anxiety, and time management. You can kick that if you want to kick the tires on it.
Would you repeat one more time?
Yeah. Our dining, the time that we eat together, we bring food and stuff, it ministers to the body to minimize/diminish fatigue, hunger, anxiety, and time management.
Is that also overlaps with fellowship?
It's got a component, but it's different because it means in some ways, the fellowship is really kind of the gathering. It's what Diane said, which is, I look forward to getting together. I get to get with these folks. People ask me, why do I carve out my Sundays to do that? It's because I get to do that. That's the fellowship. The dining in some ways is a little bit different in that you might need to think about that ahead of time. You might need to plan to make that a priority when typically it's not. And not the dining, but the participation in the dining, what that does. And then the outcome with the dining is to make it so, because I've heard Diane say this for years, and I love her for reminding me of this, and it's this. People don't want to have to go to church all day. Well, right. So if there is food that's available for folks, think about this now. Let me do a better version of this. Jesus feeds 5 to 25,000 people and then 4 to 20,000 people. Why does he do that?
They were hungry.
Yeah, they need to.
Yeah. And so they're better listeners. They're gonna dig in better if that body need gets addressed. So they're not looking for what time do we need to gather the kids together to leave to get to Jericho. They're not doing it because there's food available for them. So now they're not rushing out. They're not anxious because they're fidgeting, going, "When am I going to eat again?" They're not necessarily hungry, and sometimes food peps people up when they feel like going to sleep. / Eutychus. So the point of food is not to bring people to church. The point of food is to sustain people while they worship or while they convene. Your comments, your thoughts about that.
But we do it at the end as opposed to during.
Yeah, and you know what? What sometimes we can do, and we've done this well, is, and Elle and I will do this over the next couple of weeks, so I think we've got guests we've invited to join us. There may be a bigger meal that happens at the end, but there's food around so that folks can go and get some sustenance. They can get, that's why there's coffee. That's sometimes why there's pastries. That's why you've got grapes. So some of that stuff acts as kind of an energy reservoir for folks to be able to hang out and not worry about where the next food's coming from.
Ministers to the body to minimize / diminish fatigue. And then I don't remember what you have.
Hunger.
Hunger. Minimize hunger. Thank you.
Anxiety and time management.
Okay.
Let me make a statement about that. Oh, Di, you got something?
I was just going to say, a lot of times it's a great way for people to really connect with others, which they can't get in Sunday school or worship service.
Yeah.
Preston, I think it's brilliant how you split those up, because we've mashed them together for years. And the vaunted fellowship meal, right? But what you've done is said the eating has its own function all by itself. And that's really interesting. And I really appreciate the fact that you included the word anxiety, because lots of times people come in late because they had to have breakfast or they have to leave early because they got to go somewhere. And I know we all have lives, but it takes that out so that you can focus on the other stuff. So very, very cool to kind of reintroduce the functional aspect of food.
Thank you for that, both Diane and Pastor Bruce. I also want us to think this too. And this, at least with our 6 ministry areas, or 6 presentation areas, 2 of these are those we can't focus on to the exclusion of the others, because it'll be detrimental to the thing that I'm going to read last and next. And let me explain what that is. Sometimes churches focus on the music. And I'm not telling you that the music, like Pastor Bruce said, can't be an end all in and of itself. It can, but sometimes it winds up being the show, as opposed to it being about honoring and glorifying He who died for us. And when that gets to be the distraction, then that can't be the main thing. And that's what draws a lot of people to churches is the show, the smoke, the liquid nitrogen, the lights, all of that stuff. That's a distraction. And then the flip side of that, or the companion of that, is, folks, if a group like us, and Baptists do this a lot, if it's just for the eating, then we've missed the entire point altogether. And when I was reading some of the comments in our new Food Channel Networks exchange, we were losing the core of why it is that we're doing that. So let me pause, give you a chance to weigh in, and then I'll give you the last one. So our teaching, preaching, is the intentional congregate element for submission, transformation, and renewal. Our teaching, preaching is the intentional congregate element for submission, transformation, and renewal. What a bunch of $3 words. What does that mean?
So repeat it one more time.
Sure. Our teaching / preaching is the intentional congregate element for submission, transformation, and renewal.
So Preston, what do you mean by all those? What do you mean by those 357 words? I'm going to ask you to define them, right? You got us to define worship earlier. Your turn to define your 3 words.
Okay, good.
I know you can smack me later, but I'm putting you on the spot.
So the preaching and the teaching is the at least the thing that is prepared and prepackaged with an agenda. And it's an agenda for the group. That's the congregate element. It's an agenda for the group. And the agenda is threefold. It may have some other tendrils, but the agenda is threefold. Submission, individual and congregate submission. Transformation, individual and congregate transformation. Renewal, individual and congregate renewal. Now, do I need to define those 3 last words, or can you guys help with that if you'd like to?
I would love to weigh into this vocabulary because I think it's great. Number one, it's intentional. It doesn't happen by accident. It's an aim, it's a target. It is one of the main things we're doing, and there's a purpose for that. As we see the congregate, this is not something you're going to do by yourself. This is something we gather together, basically kind of like, working together and playing together. And the submission is when we hear from Yahweh God through the inspiration of the Spirit and through the inspiration of the man who is sharing that, we want to, or should, want to surrender to that. Submission is surrender. Transformation, we want to be able to, because we've submitted, be changed to what we're supposed to be from what we typically are. And this renewal brings us, quite frankly, right back to worship. When we get this inspiration, when we get this transformation, we're going to be new and different and thus more worshipful. And that's what I'm seeing here. These are great, great words.
So we're going to study those last two words more in depth in our next study. But please be aware that I like that Brother Gene says these are great words, but I want you to remember what Ellen said earlier. There's a difference between head knowledge and then application and walking in this. There's a difference. Okay?
And this is an area where I've fallen short. I can teach, I can talk about it, but surrender sometimes is difficult for me. I'm an old dog. New tricks are tough to transform me into. And renewal, let's face it, and once we get past a certain age, we're not so interested in apprehending the new. We want to keep on going with what we know. There's a comfort level there. So I'm going to confess right now that I have not been very, very good about receiving and applying.
I appreciate that, Brother Gene, because part of our Gilgal experience, too, is to confess our shortcomings, confess our sins one to another. And I will tell you, one of the reasons I enjoy convening with this group, not just because I have a fondness for you, but especially now that Bruce has rejoined this gang, I look forward to the transformational aspect that occurs during and then afterwards. I look forward to the teaching, the message, the interaction, the praying, the music when we get it nailed, all of those contributing to me being changed to be even a little different than when we walked in together. And there's a condition there that's a really tough one for us to apply. It's a neat word, but we don't use it really well. That is submission. And when we don't allow the transformation and renewal to happen, it's because we're unwilling to submit. We're not only unwilling to submit to the teaching, we're unwilling to submit to our Lord, Savior, Master, and we're unwilling to submit to each other. So we don't change. We wind up being the same, and then we wind up having statements or cliches that are, well, that's just the way he is. Well, you can't teach an old dog new. Well, you can't put new wine in old. That's junk. That's convenient for us to say, I like my shape the way I like it. And nothing's going to change that.
I think you really hit it, and Gene was really pushing hard on it too, that submission aspect. I mean, and certainly what you did, submission, transformation, renewal, right? That's a process that you just really cooked down to its basic elements. But somewhere along the way, we need to probably talk about why is it that people don't submit? Because I don't think it's always because they're just hardcore jerks. I think a lot of times, especially as older congregations, and this is going to play as we get out into the world, is that I think people approach it kind of like, yeah, I already know that. Already been there. And as opposed to understanding the intentional aspect of this. So we could blow this up big time. So I'm kind of excited about what that might turn into in days to come.
That's our next study. A study after we get out of the fear, because the fear is one of the components why we don't submit, why we don't transform, why we don't renew. We're going to explore that further in our next study when we get through fear, Lord willing. So take a look at that. Why we don't. All right, let me throw out some things to get in trouble. Go ahead, Di.
President, I was just thinking about the opposites of these words. You know, I don't want to be known as an unchangeable person. And I don't want to be known as the same as yesterday. You know, we always look at change as being something that's bad in a lot of ways, but actually everything in life is about change. We never stay in the same situation. I think we need to redo our thinking as far as who do you want to be known as? What's your legacy? You know, I want my kids to think of me as someone who continues to get closer to God, and that is exhibited in my relationships and how I address the world. That's, you know, when you start thinking about the opposites of these words, you don't want to be that.
Hey, Di, what you just said is so brilliant. And thank you when you were in the midst of you feeling less hanging out with us today. Because you always add these wonderful nuggets. We're gonna jump right in on what it is that you're just talking about right now. To suggest, you said a word that I'm growing to appreciate as I get older: legacy. But here's the funny thing about legacy. Watch this. It's gonna sound crazy. Some of us don't care about legacy. And if you don't care about legacy, then sometimes it messes up your whole ability to think about submission. Because you're not thinking about what you're leaving behind and what that means. You're thinking that I'm okay today, I'll be okay tomorrow, be okay the next day. And legacy is going to lend itself to the topic I think we're going to get a chance to get to in just a second. So thank you for that. All right, let me shoot myself in the foot because without the training that Steve and Sarah had, and I'm going to wield a certain weapon without handling it very well, I probably would shoot myself in the foot. So let me throw these out here and maybe create some pushback or some anger. Youth team ministry, dance ministry, puppet ministry, cookie ministry, visitation ministry. They only have a place if you fill the blank. They only have a place if, and we're talking like, let's say the convention of either our convening or even the universal church. Let me change my statement. They best have a place if they
Glorify God.
We have to ask, with everything we do, the first question we have to ask is, does it honor and glorify the Lord? Right? Because sometimes we have ministries and services and programs because somebody wants it. Because it creates a good community liaison / network opportunity. But at its core, everything, if you can ask with these 6 things, do they honor and glorify the Lord? And we've kind of drilled them down. So that's just the bare basics for us. That's why they're there. But when you start adding ministries and services and programs on, you need to ask, does it honor and glorify the Lord? And if it doesn't, then you need to be willing to jettison that bad boy. Your thoughts? Just got in trouble there. I did. Ooh.
Well, there are a couple of things there, and I'm not in any way disagreeing with what you and Sarah have said. Matter of fact, I want to reinforce that because somebody wants it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's needed. One. If you are, let's say you have a ministry in Mary Woods, senior citizens community. Does it make sense to have a youth ministry there? Is there a need for that? That sort of thing. Cookie ministry. Does it make sense to have that in a diabetic community? The point I'm making is just because we can do it and just because somebody might like to have it does not mean it's going to glorify God to do so if it's really not something that's a need. You mentioned the feedings of 5,000 to 4,000. They needed that. And that was a ministry that hopefully opened the door, and obviously it did, for folks to hear what God had to say through the Anointed One, the Messiah. I think we sometimes will get to the place where we are so caught up in programs that we forget the purpose. And I'm not trying to do all, Rick Warren thing. The reason we do things, we need to be more careful about that. I agree. I think we need to analyze things, and when we get to the place where it's not glorifying God, or it becomes something that is not only not glorifying God, but actually a detriment to the ministry, we have to be able to be brave enough to jettison that. I think of a time when in Florida, we got to the place where we were so overwhelmed with various programs that Pastor Troy just said, you know what? I'm going to call it off. Nobody going to do Sunday morning church, and that's it. And little by little, folks came back, and they were actually beginning to stand up for what they deemed as their ministry areas. I'm not even sure that was even a good reason to reinitiate things, but I think we need to really think about what are the essentials, what are the basic things we need to do. These 6 are fantastic. And maybe we need to figure out when something comes along, do we add to it? Does it fit into one of these 6? This is Bob.
Let me throw out a thought or two before I see if I can transition us to our topic study. This was all the preamble. I've known people that I've met who have come to visit a church that I might have been either attending or a member of, and one of their first questions is, do you have Awana?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've heard Ellen tell you the story of the time that we, here at the beach, we went to an Hispanic outreach that was sponsored by the Catholic Church. And we went for the purpose of discovering why the church would support this and what its Jesus relativity was. And we were sorely disappointed when what we discovered is it was a place, it was almost an event that had mostly Hispanic people there, and there was no element that introduced them to eternity through Jesus. And so it's a regular event that this church has. We've even talked with folks about it, and it's a regular event that they have because it's a community outreach. And it's a church that enjoys, watch this, I didn't put this here, volunteerism. So people feel good about volunteering. But often at its core, the reason that they volunteer is because it makes them feel good to do it. It makes them feel good to volunteer in community. And the question is, does your volunteering at its core honor and glorify the Lord? Okay? Let me give you a second one, and if I get this wrong, you can please weigh in on this, Pastor Bruce. Christian education is a key element that might make sense for your worship group or your church body to be able to present and support. And for those of you who have been long-timers here, you'll remember that one of the things that Pastor Bruce did when he was called to be the pastor of the previous Faith Baptist is he closed down the academy. And part of that rationale there, even though I was not there at the beginning of this, is because in many ways the administrative bureaucracy wasn't perhaps adhering to its original purpose, which was to honor and glorify the Lord. And it got to be more of a burden and more of a distraction. And I think that's partly why, Pastor Bruce, why you said we need to discontinue this.
I can perhaps weigh in on that. It having been one of the folks that were part of the institution, there were 2 things that I think happened. Number one, it was basically a canine extremity wagging the canine, if I can say it that way. Basically, we went from being a church that had a school to a school that had a church. It was so backwards. It was being, the wrong thing was driving. Cart for the horse, all sorts of idioms for that. Basically, it was no longer honoring the Lord. It was a burden. And yeah, we actually experienced some numerical growth, but it was really mile wide and inch deep, from what I recall.
I think that's a very accurate way to look at it, Gene. I'll just add this. I won't say, and I think this goes for these ministries that Preston's talking about. It's not that the whole thing is rotten to the core. It's just that the overall ministry has lost its way. There's always going to be even in some of the most dysfunctional ministries, there's going to be dedicated people who are in it to honor the Lord. But it's the overall thrust. And yeah, tail wagging the dog is a big part of what happened. So.
Right. And I tell you what, I was in a position at one point, and this is kind of a confession time, where if I had have had the capability to do what you were able to do, Bruce, I would have done it, but I could not. I was not in a position where I could make that happen because I, as principal of, or headmaster, whatever term you want to use, for the institution, I did not have the capability, power, the authority to say, you know what, this is no longer what it's supposed to be. We need to shut it down. And I did not have that. So I'm extremely pleased that you did what was needed. Thank you.
There were some harsh words that came from certain corners because of that, but you know, you just got to do what the Lord tells you to do. Hey, since you brought it up, just one quick jump out and then back, because we're going to run into this when we get out into the world. We will. When we help churches, we're going to run into this. One of the main things that the Academy became known as is that it offered a budget education, which that's honorable, but that came at the cost of severely underpaying the staff. And they suffered greatly because of that. And what started out as an honorable goal ended up being damaging to a lot of people. And, you know, it just, did it honor the Lord? Good question.
Some of this describes the church in Ephesus that we see in the book of Revelation. Is that they were nailing it in terms of their programs and services and ministry. But they likely at their core were not asking, are we honoring and glorifying the sacrifice of our Lord Jesus with the stuff that we're doing? And we're very busy, but is the busyness productive to honor and glorify the Lord? All right. So let me give you the topic of the study. I think that I'm going to work hard that we finish this next week. Thank you for allowing me the preamble and the soapbox, but I think we need this break. We need to kind of refocus and maybe calibrate and discover if what we're doing, we're just mailing it in, or we're doing what we're comfortable doing, or is the intent submission, transformation, and renewal for each one of us individually and congregately. So here's the topic. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? Subtitle. I see nothing. I hear nothing. I know nothing. I feel nothing when it comes to my brother's business. Plus, it's none of my business to know or do anything about it. Am I my brother's keeper? And our text is going to be early and little. Genesis 4:9. Genesis 4:9 is going to be where we're going to be next week. Am I my brother's keeper? Know nothing, I see nothing, hear nothing, feel nothing, especially because I'm not supposed to be in my brother's business anyway. So I want to leave us with some preamble to jumping in to the two first questions for next week. And I want to share with you something that's based on the brilliance. I love how Diane's mind works when she's looking at things of a spiritual nature and of a financial nature. Thank you for doing that stuff too. But when she talks about legacy, okay, let me start out this way. In the mental health, in the rehabilitation field, which I used to work in, but also our church had some slight delving with when Pastor Bruce was here following the Big Serve. I'm going to make a statement here, and let's see where you go with me on this. There are people who appear to need assistance and help, but they don't want the help you're willing to give. There are people who appear to need assistance and help. But they don't want the help, even if it's the appropriate help that you're willing to give. So let me pause there for a minute, see what you're thinking, or if you need to ask me some questions to clarify, I'm at your service.
I appreciate that, because basically it sounds like to me, getting to the root cause sometimes is difficult for us. When I've got a financial issue, just as an example, and I come to the church and I'm going, I need money for food. Well, where are you spending your money? Well,
Right.
my beer and my cigarettes and that kind of thing, and I certainly got to have my cable. It's like, okay, well, what you need to do is you need to jettison those things and spend the money like you're supposed to. Well, that's a change that a lot of folks are not interested in. Or they're in the median begging while talking on their iPhone and smoking cigarettes, which is a really, really expensive habit, by the way. So it's like, what? There's a point to which they want the help, but they don't want to resolve the issue. They want to try to alleviate the symptom.
That is correct. So let me give you a silly example of that just off the top of you responding that I can help you understand. If you are busy without being productive and someone is recognizing your fatigue and exhaustion, they suggest to you the way perhaps to mitigate that is to structure your day and life thus and so. But you like the symptoms and being able to complain about being exhausted, fatigued so much, then I see you, Diane, thank you. You're not willing to be submissive, certainly to transform and to be renewed. You are going to be the way you are because that's the way it is. And I'm comfortable in that being the situation. Pastor Bruce and I used to go to the rehab facility after the big serve and talk with folks who we were trying to help get out of their own mess and couldn't. And couldn't is probably the wrong word. They wouldn't. When given a choice between, and we're going to talk a lot about this in this study, given a choice between the better and best, they were okay with the good. By the way, that's a plague that lots of church people, Jesus believers, experience regularly. They're okay with the good, so the better and best is always elusive for them. Am I my brother's keeper? When I was in mental health and in drug rehab, this was an okay decision for people to make. And I think years ago, maybe about 7, 8 years ago, I told you the story of one of the things that we used to do, my team used to do for triage, is we would support a bunch of folks who were homeless, but also drug users who lived under the various bridges in New York, DC, and in Maryland. And my teams would go out, we would look to address the needs of these folks, whether it was food, lodging, clothing, sustenance, that kind of situation. And we had one gentleman who regularly was living in a very dilapidated situation, in tattered clothing, but he had a favorite place that he would live under a certain bridge, and then he would also change to another bridge at certain points in time. And I'm telling you this for this reason. When we did a background study on this guy, we discovered he literally had $178,000 in the bank, which would have, for most of us, transformed your life to allow you to live comfortably in the way that perhaps you aspire to live. Yet this person chose to live this way and didn't necessarily, they didn't have an issue about spending their money, but even if we would only be allowed to take this person and pay for a couple of nights' rooms and some couple of nice meals for the person, and then they would make their way back out under the bridge again. Now, in a PC world and in a world where the center is you, that's the way we provide service. When the center is you, we call that person-centered planet. When the center is supposed to be Yeshua, when the center is supposed to be Jesus, the better and best are that to which we should aspire. And this lesson, if we get there, will help us to see why. And that's through the submission, the transformation, and renewal process which is what we're supposed to be the course of our studies, the course of our working together, the course of our being here at Harvard Law School. Because if we're going to go out and help other congregations who are struggling with even standing, we're going to have to be able to say to them, this is something that you need to submit to the Lord with. You need to consider being transformed and having a renewal in order to effectively continue standing. But we've always done it that way. That's what we're most comfortable doing. It's going to create frustration or heartache or an argument. That's why we leave things the way that we leave them. So let me pause there and let you respond if you want to. I've got 3 more points to make, and then I'm going to shut up for today. Okay, good. Diane said this, and this is why I appreciate when she especially had to be on camera and weigh in. And you and Sarah recognize when you start facilitating Bible studies, sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get people to participate and then apply what it is that's going on. So when you become kind of the facilitator, there's a hunger to sort of go, yes, that's what I meant. That's what I meant to say. So watch this. Why, this is a question to you. Why do you want better for your children, family, relatives, and friends if they're content with their condition? Why do you want better for your family, your friends, relatives, your children, if they're content with their condition? That's an actual question.
Well, it goes back to your better and best, Preston, right? Because you want what's best for them, even though they may be content with it, that may not be the best place for them to be.
I would say to answer the why part of that question though is love. You, that person.
You're just using the smaller word, but yes, for what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
But no, I think you're right, yes.
If you love that person, you're commanded to love others. If you are a follower of Christ, that's part of that comes with the territory.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that you should want the best for them.
And they can't always see it the same way you see it, because we're seeing it from our own life's experience. They're still going through theirs.
Well, for our children, yes.
Can't always see the families. Can't always see the longer term effects of maybe where they are as to where they could be. But yeah, you're right, out of love, out of concern.
That's all great. I agree with all of that. I mean, the number one thing that when I think about relatives, friends, and children is I want to see them in heaven. I want to see them have that relationship. So that's where that love comes in. And it's hard to watch your kids, especially, still denying, still not listening. Sometimes I feel like we can't even get to the ones we love the most because we're too close, or I mentioned to my daughter, I had a chance to ride home with her from the beach, and it's like we got to talking about religion a little bit, and I said, your dad believes in Jesus. And she goes, oh, he never really talks about it. I said, well, he would be willing to talk about it. But, for me, they just have seen that their whole life. And I guess they almost take it for granted, but they don't give me any, I don't know what the word I'm trying to find is, but they just don't listen to me anymore. But that's why I want better for my kids, relatives, friends, and everyone is what we should have that mindset for.
Okay, well, now you're beginning to venture into territory. I was trying to stay out of this, die, but okay. Well, you have actually just helped to define why the Jesus encounters occur, why we take measure on those on a weekly basis. And let me maybe give you a little bit of a backstory, not much, not long, to help you understand where that comes from. My wife has a better, bigger heart for the lost than I do. I think I share, and I don't know if I'm not throwing Steve under the bus, but Steve and I may be driving the same vehicle or having it being driven when, if I tell you, or the good news is there for you, and you decide to choose otherwise, if the bus rolls over you, oh well, you did it. So this, among my brother's keeper, is a personal kind of application that happens here in our household. And through my wife's helping me to understand what Diane just said, that's why I give a rip. I've learned to give a rip when I didn't give a rip because I'm going, oh, well, that's them. They have a right to decide. They've grown. They can come up with what they believe in. And it's my wife is looking at the balance situation and thinking about the condition of those folks there. And I'm going, I barely read it in this paper. So I've learned over the process that I should be caring about folks who I think it's my right not to care about. And part of my brother's keeper is going to uncover why we don't. Steve, can I use you for a second with Daniel for a moment?
Sure.
Okay. You guys know that Steve's a history major. And a lot of us, if we don't love history, we at least appreciate history. And so Steve's got a son, in many ways, who's kind of like-minded, who went to a great school and said, I'm going to major in what my dad majored in. And his dad said, Steve, could you repeat?
So don't major in history. Major in something that you can actually use in the real world if you don't want to teach.
So
you can minor in history, but major in something else.
So Steve recognized that history is good because it gets you a degree, but it's not the better or the best. And yet, when those opportunities were posed to that young man, he went, I'm going to choose that which I like the best. So the unfortunate part now, the consequence is, if Steve is in the position that Diane described, that he wants what's best for his son, alias, I love him, he's got to get involved with the decisions of his son's life, his choices, and settling for the good when there's better and best available. And when Diane says legacy, sometimes, folks, it's important for us to be able to stand for the highest principles so that at our memorial service, not that folks are saying, blushing, blubbering great things about us, but they recognize that we stood for that which was the very best. And I like what Diane says, my girls know Jesus or the understanding of Jesus through me, yet I'm a prophet that has no honor in my hometown. And that's part of the danger we talked about before for putting yourself out there to do the work. Part of the work is you're going to get rejected by those folks who mostly are supposed to love and honor you. And Jesus said that, did he not? Right. So my final question before I shut up this week, by the way, thank you, Di. Thank you for the faces. Steve, thank you for letting me put you on the spit there and riding on the bus with me, because I like that bus. In my own strength, I would drive that bus. But I've got to submit to be better than my own foibles, because I'd gas that bus up, I would buy it, I'd buy a fleet of them and put a lot of folks on them, and they would be waving at folks while folks are on their way to Hades with their friends partying in the dark. There is a sentiment that's not just in America or in the world today, but it is in our church. And I want you to consider it, and then I'm going to be quiet after I say it. It's the I'm good sentiment. I'm good. I'm good. And that's partly why the subtitle is I see nothing, I hear nothing, I know nothing, I feel nothing when it comes to my brother's business. Plus, it's none of my business to know or to do anything about it. Because if you're good, then I should be good with that too. And then this is why maybe some of your lives reflect minimal Jesus encounters, because you don't see the import of what Diane just said. That all of these folks, let's do James' word here, are living nephesh. And that nephesh is supposed to be reconciled to their creator. And there's a way to do that through the man who's Jesus. That's what our job is supposed to be. And if you don't want to invite the danger, and if you're good, then doggone it, you're never going to be tainted by this stuff, because you're going to stay calcified the way that you are. I'm done. Your comments, your feedback, get off the soapboxes. You're up.
I do see that I'm good syndrome in the past and everything. In fact, I think I probably had a bit of that myself, because I, at some point, kind of been accused of being a little too nosy, or it's, asking too many personal questions, or, trying to get to know someone, and being, like, I'm good, back off, basically. So I kind of went through a time where I backed off and, just let people be. And so it's sort of having to get that out of my system and relearn how to be more effective and have the courage to try that again after kind of getting brushed off too many times early on. It's a little difficult to get that mindset turned around. A work in progress on that. So I see how that can happen and how it can be easy to stay in that zone.
I'd like to share something I read this morning. It spoke to me because it was like, I'll just read it, see what it says to you. This is Isaiah 50, verse 10 in New American Standard. Who is among you that fears the Lord, Yahweh, that obeys the voice of his servant, that walks in darkness and has no light? Let him trust in the name of the Lord, Yahweh again, and rely on him. That spoke to me because when we can't see how the Lord's going to work it out, we still need to trust. When we want to be obedient and we can't see how it's going to be good for us, we need to trust. There is this is huge to me, because, I had a discussion with Preston, and he's basically doing a good job of trying to keep me accountable. I appreciate that. There have been other folks, and I'm not going to name any names, but there have been other folks that I'm going to say he's probably tried to share that with and try to demonstrate that with, but they didn't receive it properly because they felt like it was an affront to their authority. I don't have any authority, number one. Number two, he wants to make everybody fast. And part of what we're talking about is this reliance, this accountability. He used brother's keeper and Cain and all that kind of thing. The deal is we do have a responsibility, and I'm preaching to myself right now, okay? We do have a responsibility to want the best for everyone, because that's the definition of love that we encounter. And we need to stop. I'm going to use an expression I haven't used in a while. We need to stop being willing to sacrifice the best on the altar of the good. And I'm right there. I'm going to be working on this. Let me just say it.
I've been writing down some words as I've been listening, and I guess all of these things apply to me at different times. But I wrote down complacency, ignorance, not seeking, not submitting, not being faithful in my individual worship, and that whole wanting to be fed only, not willing to give anything back. You know, we can sit there in church and we can be saved, and that's a wonderful thing, but what are we doing for God? He's done so much for us. How are we reciprocating what he did, that grace, that mercy?
We've got to be expert at this concept, these concepts, folks. We're going to go out and help other folks. And we're going to deep dive into what seems to be a throwaway verse because it goes along with a story that's bigger. But we're going to tackle what that looks like. So we're going to jump around in the scripture, hopefully in a contextual sense. Am I my brother's keeper? Please be aware, we're going to start next week with 2 questions. First question is going to be, why did Yahweh ask, where's your brother?
Say that again?
Yeah. Why does Yahweh ask, where is your brother? Followed up in parentheses, this is not really the second question, but it'll be there too. Followed up by, doesn't Yahweh know where Abel is? Okay. Why does Yahweh ask, where's your brother? And then here's the second question. What is Cain's response? Am I my brother's keeper? What does it mean? Those are the 2 questions we're going to start with next week. Thank you all for participating and hanging. Look, I think every time we get together is an opportunity for information, for strategy, for conferencing about our failures and our successes. But they're also an opportunity for us to practice submission, transformation, and renewal. And if not submission to Yahweh, because we haven't figured out how to do that, submission at least to each other. That's a good starting point, too.
I apologize. What was the second question? Did he know? Is that the question?
The first question, the second question is what did Cain's response mean, right? That was your second question?
Right. Am I my brother's keeper? What's Cain mean by that?
Ah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, folks, for taking this week seriously. I appreciate you taking notes, jotting down some of this stuff, folks. If you repeat it to yourself, if you look at it regularly, it will help you be aware of our mission and our vision. And we've got some important decisions potentially that are going to be on our table pretty soon. Let's be the most ready for those. Let's be the most ready for those, asking the Lord to empower us to discern what's the right and what's the best. And then let's be able to confidently move in the directions that make the best sense for us to move in. Lord permit.